Freddie Mercury stood backstage at London's Royal Opera House on March 14, 1987, moments before one of the most important performances of his career, when a woman's voice cut through the pre-show chaos like a knife. "You'll never sing opera, Mr. Mercury. Your voice simply isn't trained for it." What happened in the next 3 hours would change classical music forever, and leave a 53-year-old piano teacher questioning everything she thought she knew about art. It was 6:00 p.m., 2 hours before curtain call. The Royal Opera House buzzed with an unusual energy that evening. Classical music purists filled seats alongside rock fans, creating a tension you could feel in the air. The orchestra members tuned their instruments with extra precision, aware that tonight's performance of selections from Barcelona would either validate or destroy months of controversial preparation. Outside, protesters held signs. Inside, critics sharpened their pencils. Margaret Whitmore had taught classical piano for 31 years at the prestigious Westminster Conservatory. She was 53 years old, a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to the purity of classical training. Her students went on to play in symphony orchestras across Europe. Her methods were old school, uncompromising, exact. She believed in tradition the way some people believe in religion. Margaret had received her invitation to the performance through her former student David Chen, who now played viola in the Royal Opera House Orchestra. She almost didn't come. The idea of a rock star attempting opera felt like sacrilege to her. But David insisted, practically begged, and Margaret's curiosity won out over her skepticism. She arrived early, dressed in her usual concert attire, a navy dress, pearl necklace, sensible heels. She clutched her program with white knuckles as she read about Mercury's collaboration with Montserrat Caballé. The very concept made her teeth hurt. Opera required years of specific training, vocal discipline that began in childhood, techniques passed down through generations. You didn't just walk into opera from rock and roll. When Margaret spotted Mercury in the corridor leading to the green rooms, she'd been looking for David to wish him luck. She couldn't help herself. Her entire body stiffened. This was her chance to speak truth to someone who was, in her view, disrespecting everything she held sacred. "Mr. Mercury," she called out, her voice carrying that particular authority that only veteran teachers possess. Freddie turned, eyebrows raised, still in his pre-performance robe. His makeup was half done. He looked tired. "Yes? I'm Margaret Whitmore. I teach classical piano at Westminster Conservatory." She drew herself up to her full 5'4". "I need to tell you something important." Freddie's expression shifted to polite interest. "Of course. You'll never sing opera?" "Oh." The words came out more harshly than she'd intended, but she didn't soften them. "Your voice simply isn't trained for it. What you're doing tonight, it's not opera. It's a rock star playing dress-up, and frankly, it's insulting to those of us who've dedicated our lives to this art form." The hallway went silent. Freddie's assistant, Peter, stepped forward protectively, but Freddie held up one hand. His face showed no anger, just something that looked like sadness. "You think so?" Freddie asked quietly. "I know so," Margaret said. "Opera requires specific training, years of it. Proper breathing techniques, vocal placement, understanding of the tradition. You can't just—" she gestured vaguely. "Jump into it because you feel like it." Freddie studied her for a long moment. Behind them, someone called 5-minute warning. The air felt thick. "What's your name again?" he asked. "Margaret Whitmore." "Margaret." He said it carefully, like he was memorizing it. "Will you do me a favor?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Stay after the performance, just for a few minutes. Please." Something in his voice made her nod before she could think better of it. The performance began at 8:00 p.m. sharp. Margaret sat in her seat, row G, dead center, arms crossed. She told herself she would remain objective, clinical. She would note every technical flaw, every breach of proper form. She would prove herself right. The lights dimmed. The orchestra began the opening bars of Barcelona, and then Freddie Mercury opened his mouth. The first notes hit Margaret like a physical force. Her body went rigid in her seat. That wasn't possible. The power, the control, the way his voice filled every corner of the massive hall without a hint of strain. He moved through the difficult passages with a precision that stunned her. His breath control was extraordinary. The way he supported his notes from the diaphragm, the pure tone quality, the seamless transitions between registers. These weren't tricks or rock star showmanship. This was real technique. When Montserrat Caballé joined him for their duet, Margaret felt her hands start to shake. Two voices, one trained in the most traditional classical methods, one forged in rock and roll, met in perfect harmony. They didn't clash. They enhanced each other. Caballé, one of the world's most respected sopranos, treated Mercury as an equal, and he rose to meet her, note for impossible note. Margaret's eyes began to burn. She told herself it was just the stage lights, but when Mercury hit the soaring climax of "How Can I Go On?", something broke open inside her chest. The sound wasn't just technically impressive, it was transcendent. It spoke to something beyond training, beyond tradition, beyond everything she thought she knew. Around her, the audience sat in absolute stillness. You could hear breathing. Someone in the row behind her was crying openly. The classical music critics she'd spotted earlier had stopped writing. They were just listening, mouths slightly open, witnessing something none of them had expected. The performance lasted 97 minutes. When the final note faded, there was a beat of silence. Just one. And then the entire Royal Opera House erupted. The standing ovation went on for 12 minutes. 12. Margaret stood too, her hands shaking so badly she could barely clap. Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. 30 minutes later, Margaret stood backstage in the green room, feeling completely out of place among the celebration. David had found her in the lobby and insisted she come back, though she'd tried to refuse. She wanted to leave, to go home and process what she'd just witnessed, but David wouldn't hear it. "He asked for you specifically," David said. "Please, Mrs. Whitmore, just 5 minutes." When Freddie entered the room, still in his performance costume, a bottle of water in one hand, he spotted Margaret immediately. He walked straight to her. "You stayed," he said. Margaret couldn't speak. She just nodded. Freddie gestured to 2 chairs in the corner, away from the crowd of well-wishers. They sat. Margaret noticed his hands were trembling slightly. The performance had taken everything from him. "I need to tell you something," Margaret finally managed. Her voice came out broken. "I was wrong. I was so completely, utterly wrong." Freddie shook his head. "You weren't wrong about training. You were right. Opera does require years of specific discipline. But you—" "I've been training," Freddie said simply. "For 3 years. Private vocal coaches, breathing exercises, studying recordings of the great tenors. I practiced until my voice bled. I learned everything I could because I respected this art form too much to approach it casually." He paused. "But here's what I learned that changed everything. Training is important, but so is soul. So is passion. So is the willingness to honor tradition while bringing something new to it." Margaret felt something crack in her chest. 31 years of rigid certainty, crumbling. "I've spent my entire career," she said slowly, "telling students there's only one way to do things. The right way. The classical way. There's nothing wrong with tradition," Freddie said gently. "Tradition is the foundation, but it shouldn't be a prison." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them the celebration continued, but it felt distant. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out her program. Her hands still shook. "Would you sign this for me?" Freddie smiled. A real smile, warm and tired and kind. He took the program and wrote something. When he handed it back, Margaret read, "For Margaret, thank you for challenging me to prove you wrong. Never stop demanding excellence. Love, Freddie." "I have a favor to ask you," Freddie said. Margaret looked up. "Anything. I'm starting a foundation for young musicians who don't fit the traditional mold, kids who love classical music but are told they're not right for it because they're too different, too unconventional, or they discovered it too late." His eyes were intense. "Would you consider being on the advisory board? I need someone who understands classical training. Someone who knows the standards but might also be willing to help me challenge them." Margaret's throat closed up. Yes, I would be honored. But here's the part that nobody saw coming. Margaret Whitmore didn't just join the Foundation's advisory board. Over the next 5 years, she completely transformed her teaching methods. She began accepting students she would have previously turned away. Rock musicians wanting to understand classical technique, jazz singers seeking formal training, kids from working-class families who'd started too late, according to traditional standards. Her colleagues at Westminster Conservatory were scandalized. Some stopped speaking to her entirely, but Margaret didn't care anymore. She'd seen what was possible when you combined rigorous training with unconditional acceptance of different paths to excellence. By 1991, Margaret had left Westminster entirely and opened her own school in a converted warehouse in East London. She called it the Mercury School of Music, with Freddie's permission and financial support. The school accepted anyone with passion and commitment, regardless of background or previous training. She brought in teachers from multiple disciplines: opera, rock, jazz, traditional folk music from around the world. When Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991, Margaret was teaching a class. Someone interrupted to tell her. She dismissed her students, locked herself in her office, and wept for 2 hours straight. Not just for Freddie, but for all the students she'd turned away over 30 years, for all the talent she'd dismissed because it didn't fit her narrow definition of right. The funeral was private, but Freddie had left specific instructions. Margaret received a package a week after his death. Inside was the silk scarf he'd worn during that first Barcelona performance at the Royal Opera House, along with a note, "Keep pushing boundaries, Margaret. The music needs both of us. Love always, F." Margaret framed the scarf and hung it in the main hall of the school. Underneath, a plaque read, "Excellence has many voices." The Mercury School of Music still operates today, 34 years later. It's trained over 2,000 musicians who've gone on to careers spanning every genre imaginable. 3 have won Grammy Awards. 7 perform regularly with major symphony orchestras. 15 front their own rock bands. 2 teach at Juilliard. Margaret Whitmore ran the school until she was 78 years old, finally retiring in 2012. She passed away in 2019 at age 85, surrounded by former students who flew in from around the world to be with her. At her memorial service, they performed Barcelona in its entirety. When the final note faded, the silence in the chapel felt sacred. On her desk, found after her death, was a journal. The entry from March 14, 1987 reads, "Tonight I learned that being wrong can be the greatest gift. I thought I was protecting music. I was actually limiting it. Freddie Mercury taught me that tradition and innovation aren't enemies, they're partners. And the greatest disrespect to any art form isn't breaking its rules. It's refusing to let it grow." The story of that night at the Royal Opera House reminds us that the gatekeepers of tradition, the people who dedicate their lives to preserving standards and maintaining excellence, serve a vital purpose. But the rebels, the rule breakers, the ones who dare to approach sacred spaces from unexpected angles, they serve a vital purpose too. Progress happens in the conversation between these two forces, in the moment when rigid certainty meets undeniable talent and both sides learn to bend. Freddie Mercury never performed opera professionally again after his final collaboration with Montserrat Caballé. But in those few years of pushing boundaries, he opened doors that remain open today. And Margaret Whitmore, who started that evening as his harshest critic, became one of his most important partners in legacy. Sometimes the people who challenge us most directly become the ones who change us most profoundly. And sometimes, having the courage to admit we were wrong is the bravest thing we'll ever do. If this incredible story of Freddie Mercury's determination and Margaret's courage to change moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of staying open to being proven wrong. Have you ever had a moment when someone completely changed your perspective on something you thought you knew for certain? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends.